A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Of course, the federal election is fast approaching, and even though there might not be a date set, the longer Albo takes, maybe the shorter the campaign will be for the election. But it is fast approaching, and Australia still has such a long way to go when the battle against extreme gender ideology is so far from being won. A snapshot today on where things are at in a nation where our national leaders appear to be a little confused with the biological and biblical concept that there are only two sexes, male and female. Our special guest today is planning a major campaign with billboards and newspaper ads and social media campaigns to cut through the noise. Kirralie Smith from Binary says, when your voice is too loud for the local MPs to ignore, that's when real change can happen. She says every flyer delivered, every ad placed, and every message shared helps protect families from radical activists. Well, our special guest today is Kirralie Smith, who leads Binary. She says activists are trying to shut down her freedom to defend girls and women. She's one of the very courageous women standing up to the rampant campaign to degender Australian society. Kirralie Smith, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, as always, for having me, Neil.
Kirralie, I just wanted to get a bit of a snapshot, and maybe we can start off our conversation because there is a coming election. I do note that there'll be some feeling like a little blasé about that and ho-hum, Labor or the Liberal National Coalition, whoever wins, maybe it'll all be the same. But is there an opportunity here, as we get a bit of a snapshot on things that are happening, is this an opportunity to actually change and make a difference?
Look, it is absolutely an opportunity. It's always an opportunity to do that because, our voice matters, our vote matters, and it's really important that people are informed and understand who and exactly what they are voting for. And look, I understand Australians are very apathetic when it comes to government and politics at the moment because our choices don't seem like real choices. So what we need to do is speak up, get involved, be engaged, make sure that we're communicating with our local members and communicating loudly about what we desire as Australians because ultimately they work for us. We don't work for them.
Kirralie, all the polls that I'm seeing are saying that Australians are most interested, and perhaps it's because there's a hurting hip pocket. The cost of living crisis is really taking its toll, and that's the only thing that Australians are focused on, if you listen to some of the commentators. But I imagine when we start to talk about the degendering of Australian society, all of the problems that's had and the challenges for women's sport and women's spaces, I imagine this has got to be up there as one of the most important questions that politicians will be trying to avoid talking about. What are your thoughts here?
Look, they've already said, Neil, that they don't want this to be an election issue, and all the more reason why we need to make it an election issue. We've seen around the world, when it comes to women's sex-based rights and child protection, that it's really important. From Argentina to the US to the UK, it doesn't matter where it is. This is a human rights issue, and women's sex-based rights and child safeguarding are at great risk. And unfortunately, Anthony Albanese has no appetite whatsoever to address the really horrific situation in Australia where Julia Gillard in 2013 removed sex-based rights from the Sex Discrimination Act. And Peter Dutton, unfortunately, has said that he knows the difference between male and female. He doesn't think that men should be in women's sport, but he also said he has no appetite to change the Sex Discrimination Act. So we're in a really difficult situation, and it is time that Australians really stood up and spoke out about this because this is impacting women and girls, children right around the country. We've put out a book called Devastated. It's an account of 9 families whose lives are being destroyed by gender ideology. And we've also seen that men in women's sports, women's prisons, women's awards, it's all being colonised and encroached upon by males who wish that they were women.
It seems to be, even as you say that, it sounds like the national leaders of our nation are too afraid to poke the hornet's nest, which you might say would be the LGBT extremist lobby. because they don't want that battle and they don't want to have the LGBT movement against them as politicians. And you can understand where they might be coming from there, but is that the reality? You think they're just afraid of the intimidation of the LGBT lobby?
Absolutely. I think they're afraid. Both parties have said we won't engage in Trumpian-style politics. But the reality here is I don't understand why journalists aren't asking them, why don't they want girls to have single-sex sports? Why don't they want women to feel safe and protected in their own spaces like changing rooms and prisons? Why don't they want children to be safeguarded from experimental medical procedures that are doing extreme harm to these children? And these politicians are getting away with, just saying, we're going to sweep this under the carpet. We don't want to draw a line in the sand. We don't want to be seen for or against anything. And it's just not reality, Neil. They have to draw a line in the sand. We have to force them to do that. We must ensure that that conversation is being had because it is impacting so many people in Australia.
Well, when you've got girls and women, the big losers in this whole debate, you might be thinking that half the population of Australia ought to be very intensely interested in this. I mean, when we talk about biology, I mean, this is not just, this is not some rhetoric that you're pulling out of the air trying to campaign on a particular dimension, because when we talk biology, when we talk Bible, there's an agreement there, there's an alignment. It's not really an argument that has to be won for anyone who's got some common sense. What are your thoughts around the fact that people are ignoring some of these most obvious things like biology and Bible?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely mind-boggling because this is a scientific-based evidence that confirms what the Bible says right in the opening chapter, that there is male and female, that's it, there's nothing else, and no third gamete, no third sex has ever been discovered, and yet we're now in this crazy situation where I literally had to sit on the stand in court and defend what a woman is and to explain what a woman is to the court, and I just find that unbelievable that we're in that situation. I'm being, dragged through the courts because I state evidence-based truth. Other women are being dragged through the courts. Other girls are being, having to self-exclude from sports and different spaces. The ongoing effects of this is incredible. So it really is mind-boggling. This should not be a controversial thing. Of course, people who have gender dysphoria require care and compassion, but they don't require affirmation. We don't affirm people with eating disorders or depression or suicidal ideation. We help them, we support them. So why we're affirming this nonsense is really dangerous, really harmful, and it is beyond comprehension.
Now, we have talked for years and we've kept up with some of the developments that have happened around you and the times that you've been dragged before the courts, and you might like to give us an update, whatever you're able to share on those. I'm not sure whether those courts, while they do set out to gag you from actually speaking, about how much that can actually gag you from actually telling the truth as to the circumstances. What can you tell us about your current legal battles and the courts that you are being dragged before?
Look, it's really infuriating and frustrating that I can't speak about a lot of it. I have been gagged by the courts by being put under an apprehension of violence order for simply identifying males in female sport. I'm appealing that decision because obviously I strongly disagree and I think women should be able to defend sex-based rights in Australia. I also have 2 ongoing vilification matters. Again, being told by males that I've hurt their feelings, that they identify as women and they should be referred to as women. But while I have great compassion that people in their lives have lied to them and affirmed that they're women, they're not women. They're males, and I will not stop saying that no matter how many legal threats are hanging over my head.
So if we're getting a snapshot of what things are like right now in Australia, just knowing that you are before the courts on a whole lot of areas, your voice is being gagged, and I know that there'll be a lot of women who'll see the Kirralie Smith voice as a voice for all women, and so it's women being gagged in the courts, and I wonder whether, is that part of the snapshot of what we should understand about where Australia is right now?
Well, look, the snapshot is it's a mess, and that there are so many people afraid of speaking out because they see what's happened to Dale Grover, in the federal court, a judge wrongly or falsely claimed that you can change your sex and penalised her for not allowing a male on a female-only app. I'm being penalised. There are sporting athletes who are being threatened and gaslit when it comes to this. It's happening right around the country, and so people are just holding their breath thinking, this is insane, this should not be happening. None of us are being violent, none of us are being hateful. We're simply speaking a biological truth, and yet we're being punished for it. And so I think it's coming to a climax and ahead, and we really need to make sure that in this election both options are held to account.
I can't help but think International Women's Day is coming up this weekend, and women appear to be being dragged back civilizationally in these sorts of debates and arguments that are going on, and to hear that our national politicians don't even want this to become any sort of election campaign issue, that might rile a few women around these sorts of issues. So far as International Women's Day, feminist groups, and not all of those feminist groups are Christian. And lots of them, Christians might take a lot of issues with the sorts of things that they stand for. But where are they at on this, Kirralie?
Yeah, look, there really is a uniting of many groups across Australia, from Christians like myself right through to hardline radical left feminists who feel like they've been excluded and ignored. Lesbians who are not allowed to meet because you can't advertise meetings that are for females only. So there is an alliance going on across the nation, because this isn't a left or right issue. It's not an ethnic issue. It's not a religious issue. This is a human rights, most fundamental, basic issue, that there's male and female and that's it. And the ones who are suffering most because the females are not protected are females.
Now, you mentioned Julia Gillard and taking some wording out of the Sex Discrimination Act when she was Prime Minister. When we talk about how these things might be reformed, how these things might be fixed, is it as easy as reinserting some of the words that she took out?
Look, I think that's the best and most effective place to start. We don't have executive orders like the US, so we can't look to a president or a prime minister who might do that. But by reinstating the sex-based definitions of male and female in the Sex Discrimination Act, then it virtually enables and empowers, whether it's schools, sporting organisations, prisons, rape crisis shelters, you name it, to have female-only spaces without fear of repercussions in the legal space. Because at the moment, those definitions don't exist, and therefore, but gender identity does, and you are protected if you identify as the opposite sex, but you are not protected if you actually are that particular sex. So yes, I think that would go a long way to it. And I do want to say that the National Party, who are a part of the coalition, have included this in their policy statements, but the Liberal Party won't come to the party, which is really disappointing and frustrating.
It's challenging, and this is why you have to have some sort of a campaign in the lead up to the election. Just in a nutshell, because we're about to go to a break, what are you planning for the sort of campaign that you're wanting people to be a part of? Maybe you want some people on the ground in various towns and cities around the country, or maybe you need some dollars for a fighting fund. What are you hoping will happen with this campaign?
Yes, we need all of the above, Neil. We are definitely going to be campaigning as hard as we possibly can, always limited by resources, of course, but we're going to particularly focus on Western Sydney in New South Wales, because that is where there's some Labor-held seats that are strongholds or are, possibly could fall in this election, and we really need to educate the people of Western Sydney and concentrate a lot of resources there with what we call truth trucks, billboards, advertising, and a nationwide social media campaign that will inform voters. It will provoke conversation and make sure that this issue is front and centre when it comes to the 2025 federal election.
Well, binary.org.au is the website for Binary. Our special guest this hour, Kirralie Smith, leads Binary, and you can join into our conversation. I do want to open our talkback lines on 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation today as we get a bit of a snapshot as to where things are at and what you do to change national values. An important conversation with Kirralie Smith, and back with more in just a few moments.
Helping you make sense of life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
You know, our talkback line is open and you might have a word of encouragement. You might have a question or a comment. You're even welcome if you have a critique for our conversation today. If you're wanting to argue an opposite position, you can do that. Our special guest is very happy to be able to take questions and comments and even a critique. Our special guest is Kirralie Smith. She leads Binary, and we are getting an update, something of a snapshot as to what's on, what's the challenges are here, what's on the line. What's the likely outcomes? I mean, because there's a federal election that is very close. And there's an opportunity to be able to get a national values conversation going around women and their value and some of the challenging things that have been taking women down a peg or two. Kirralie, you've got a documentary that's going to air on the Sky News channel this week. What's that all about?
Look, it's called Fair Game, and Caroline Marcus, one of the senior reporters for Sky, has put this special together. She is a fantastic woman who really understands the issue, and she has interviewed players who have had to play against male athletes in female sporting competitions, including our amazing Olympian and Commonwealth Games champion, Deborah Ackerson. She has a female sports soccer player, who's been in the competition with the Flying Bats, which has up to 5 males playing in that competition, and these girls are getting humiliated week in and week out. The Flying Bats won 8-0 last night in their pre-season cup match. This is happening over and over again, and so there will be a special focus on males in female sport. I have been a part of this documentary, as have a few other outspoken people in this area, and we're just so thankful that Sky and Caroline Marcus can see the issue and are going to highlight it and draw attention to it because, as I said, our politicians seem to think this is only happening in America and it's only Donald Trump who cares about it, and it's just not true. This is a very complicated issue in Australia. We don't have women's sex-based rights, and so we need voices like yours, Neil, that have been so consistent for years and across all spaces in media to start talking about this.
Now, that documentary going to air on Thursday night, 8:30 p.m. Daylight Savings Time, is what I understand. It's called Fair Game, and so there's a big focus on sport and the degeneration that we've seen in some of the sporting activities.
Yes, that's right. There'll be a focus. I believe it's a half-an-hour special, and it will be pinpointing the exact problems, the cost to women, and the difficulties that women face. Because we're often told, why don't they just not play against these males? Which is definitely an option, Neil, but it's a difficult option because these female athletes are being threatened with suspension, expulsion and legal actions. They're watching what's happened to people like myself. They just want to play soccer. They're not activists. They're not people who want to necessarily stand up and be a voice in the nation. They just simply want to go and play soccer. They've spent their entire life training and competing to get to this Premier League level. And it's really frustrating and disappointing when the officials at Football Australia, Football New South Wales and the North West Sydney Football League refuse to stand up for them. But this is happening across all sports in Australia. This will just be a particular highlight.
And it's going to be a television special, so no doubt there'll be all sorts of footage of women being pummeled and bowled over on the sporting field, and the obvious male versus female controversy insofar as the inequality in sporting prowess is going to be on display. I mean, that's why you have a women's sporting competition, isn't it? Because women are different to men.
Correct, and it's really confronting to watch males play a contact sport with women. It's rough as it is, and women, yes, can get injured by other women. However, when you have males who have much stronger bone density, more muscle mass, they are going to have so many advantages when it comes to speed and strength. That's, as you said, it's the whole reason why we have male and female divisions in the first place. And they've just negated it. They've erased women's sports by making it a mixed sport. These men can still play in the male division, in open divisions, in mixed divisions, but they don't belong in women's sport.
Let's just change track back to some of the issues around how you get these sorts of things on an agenda so that the nation is aware of these, and with an election coming, of course, that creates opportunity. To be negative, Kirralie, is to simply do battle with the activists. But there's an important dimension, I guess, in a positive approach that might celebrate men and women and their differences. I wonder whether there's room for that. I mean, how do you think people characterise Kirralie Smith and binary? I mean, are you characterised as just because you're someone who's doing battle with activists, or is this other dimension of celebrating men and women just as much a part of you?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And obviously, haters hate and they tell lies and they try and pull me down. But I have an enormous amount of support. We have over 100,000 supporters around the country, and some of our content goes viral. But I also have people who I just meet in the street. I've met at recent events this year with our book launches, with political events and other activities that I've been to. And all of them thank me for the work that I'm doing. It is just common sense. It is being a voice for the voiceless. It's reasonable. As I said, I'm never aggressive. I don't threaten anyone. I'm not violent. I don't swear. I honour Jesus in every way that I can. And so overall, most people are very grateful, very thankful, and let me know that.
Taking calls, 1-800-316-316. If you'd like to join in our conversation today, let's take a call. Sue is in Kingston in Tasmania. Hey, Sue, welcome along.
Hi, Neil. Thank you very much. And hello, Kirralie. I just want to congratulate you on what you're doing. You inspire me enormously because I've been really up against it in terms of trying to promote a more holistic approach in the mental health sector, bringing the spiritual aspect in and basing it on 2 Timothy 1:7. And the opposition I've received not only within the mental health sector and particularly the men, but also from church leaders. And so I really take inspiration from you, and I'm trusting that one day God will give me the voice that I know He wants me to have, to be able to speak up more boldly, more courageously, but less angrily, if that makes sense, because coming through the lived experience, believe me, I've had a lot of anger to deal with.
And, 2 Timothy 1:7, and lots of listeners will be familiar with that, and anyone who's had Bible memory scriptures over many years, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind, or a self-discipline. Kirralie, this is something that, maybe you need to just evaluate where you're at in how you actually take action. What are your thoughts here for Sue as she's facing these challenges in the mental health sphere?
Yeah, look, my heart really goes out to you, Sue, and I just want to say good on you, and how inspirational for you to be able to see that this is a real issue and it needs to be addressed. And I want to say keep going and encourage you, and I want to remind you and all the listeners that the truth is not an idea or a concept. The truth is a person, and his name is Jesus, and if we're followers of Jesus, we don't have to be afraid of the truth. And God is also love. Jesus is God. So the truth is love. Love is the truth. And in this situation, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to gender dysphoria, when it comes to any of these things, it's not loving or kind to lie to people or deceive them into believing they can be something they are not. Mm-hmm. It is only loving and kind and truthful to affirm their natural sex and to help them embrace that and move forward. So you are being just like Jesus, Sue, in trying to do this. And I'm so sorry to hear that you're facing opposition, particularly from within the church. I faced opposition from within the church. I also get a lot of support, but there is opposition from church leaders because I think it's scary for them to be, confronted that they have to make a choice, which way are they going to go. Yeah. So keep going, Sue. Well done. And you are being just like Jesus when you proclaim the truth and you help people have a sound mind.
Anything further, Sue?
Really.
Sue, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate your call. Kirralie, let me ask you about the Trump effect, because we've had Donald Trump in the White House for a bit over a month now, I think it is. One of the executive orders that he signed was to do away with a lot of the gender ideology issues that they were facing in the US. There's been all sorts of opposition to that, of course, but does that Trump effect make much difference in the sorts of things you're seeing around these issues?
Yes and no. As we said earlier, that there is no such thing as an executive order in Australia, so we can't have that same action. But Trump's actually signed several, including that sex is binary. There's male and female, and that's only what government agencies from now on will recognise. Now, we could legislate that as well here in Australia. He has signed an executive order to protect women in women's sports. That is, that there'll be no males, regardless of how they identify in women's sports. And he's signed some to protect children and education, which, again, our lawmakers could easily do in this country, but they refuse. They have been able to go and fly under the radar for many years now because our media in general won't speak about this. They're not being held to account. There's no opposition in terms of the government has the position that males can appropriate womanhood. The opposition have felt the same way. So there's been no major party opposing that sort of policy. But now, thanks to Trump, the media is picking up on it. People are talking about it. I've seen a lot of the general public have confidence now to throw in their 2 cents worth. And there certainly is an increasing appetite. And journalists are beginning to ask our leaders some of the harder questions. I don't think they're going far enough. But as you know, we will make sure that it's a campaign issue by blitzing Western Sydney and social media with the questions that we all want answered. You know, why aren't women worth protecting or having sex-based rights in Australia? Why aren't we protecting children from harmful experimental medications?
You might wonder about the discrepancy that no one in Australia in our major parties is standing up and saying, well, I think Trump's probably got it right here. I think we'll make that part of our policy platform. But the interesting thing, where the rubber hits the road, when there's a sporting competition, I wonder how American athletes are going to fare when it comes to competing in international games like the Olympics, or it could be any other number of sporting events where some of these issues around gender and sex are being ignored. Any thoughts here as to how that might? There's going to be an effect whether anyone likes it or not.
Look, there is, and Trump has said there will be no males in female sports at the next Olympics in America. But what we're also seeing is international sporting organisations are starting to read the room and understand that we don't want men in women's sport. After the last Olympics, where a male competitor smashed the face and head of a female boxer, it was just so sickening to watch. So a lot of international sporting codes are now winding it back and saying that males can't compete in female competitions. However, in Australia, nearly every grassroots competition still allows it. So the girls who are up-and-coming athletes are being discouraged and humiliated week in, week out at the moment as they have to play against males. And many of our best won't even see it through because it's not an environment where they feel protected or safe. They have males in female change rooms. They're being beaten by these males. So it's really a mess. And as I said, I think it's all going to start coming to a head as we see more and more of these males taking away female awards and their places, their dignity in these sports. So it may take some time, Neil, but I think that the wheels are set in motion now.
And I know you've got a wonderful relationship with some elite female athletes who are actually taking up the challenge here and speaking out. But is this thought of being cancelled one of the things that intimidates and causes fear from people who just won't speak up and declare the reality?
Yeah, look, absolutely. They are being threatened and gaslit. I've had female athletes literally weeping in my arms, Neil. They have young families. They've just started out in their careers. These are, 20s, women in their 20s who can't afford to lose their jobs, to be ostracised in their community or taken to court. They simply don't have the resources or the fortitude to be able to deal with these things, and nor should they, I would say. This should be up to the officials, the coaches, the parents, and people like myself to keep highlighting this terrible inequity and inequality in women's sport. We hear the left in particular and our politicians constantly prattling on about inclusion and tolerance and equality, but it's not happening, Neil, because women are being threatened and intimidated into silence. They either have to self-exclude or they have to suck it up, and neither is acceptable in my book.
So the inclusion and the tolerance and the equality doesn't apply to women. I mean, we're often talking about how that doesn't apply to Christians, but let's just broaden that. Whether you're Christian or not, it doesn't apply to women.
Correct. We feel very disenfranchised and disempowered. Like as I said, there's so many women on the left who feel very politically homeless. There's no party on the left that's willing to stand up for this, at least in the centre and on the right. We do have the Nationals and many of the other parties like the Libertarians, One Nation, of course, Family First are fantastic in this area, and other independents and smaller parties, but none of the majors want to represent women, and it's a really frustrating time to be a woman in Australia.
Now, I think you said a little earlier, and we've had a conversation before, about where you're going to be focusing your campaign, and Western Sydney is one of those areas that, all of the different parties are a little bit concerned about, because the election could be won or lost in Western Sydney. Thoughts here about how these things are taking with some level of traction on the ground in Western Sydney and in other electorates as well?
Look, I'm really encouraged at what I'm seeing, Neil, and particularly that there are other organisations in this space like Advance Australia that are also targeting Western Sydney. We know that the Greens they're not for Australia in any way, shape or form. We need to expose their agenda and get them out. And then next comes, some of these Labor left-wing extremists, again, don't have Australia's best interests in mind, and they particularly don't have women's best interests in mind. So we are seeing and getting a good response so far, but the campaign is yet to fully rampage because the election hasn't been announced yet. But we're ready to go. The minute the election's announced, we will be blanketing Western Sydney and social media with our campaign message that women deserve sex-based rights and children need safeguarding.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you say that the major parties are on the one ticket when it comes to how they're standing for sex and gender here, because when there's no obvious difference, then it does cancel out the importance of where the campaign goes. And so do you think that somehow or other here, these major parties collaborating together for what is something that can be proven not to be real, that actually just doesn't make a lot of sense?
Oh, look, it makes no sense whatsoever to me, Neil. I hope that the Liberal Party especially will wake up to this agenda and will just do the right thing and state the truth. And what I want to say to voters is, particularly, preference voting means it's your vote, your preferences. So be informed, ask your candidates where they stand on this issue and cast your votes accordingly. Don't listen to what the parties are telling you. Do your own research, make your own decision and cast your own vote, because that is powerful. And communicate who you're voting for to those people, because they will quickly change their minds if they realise that the appetite in Australia is for women's sex-based rights and child safeguarding.
Well, our talkback line's open on 1800 316 316 to have your say. Let me ask you about the scenario. And the most likely scenario, apparently, according to the polls, is that Labor would be returned in a hung parliament, and there would be the likely formation of a Labor-Greens power-sharing arrangement for the government of Australia. What's the scenario that comes to mind for you around the battle that you're in, around these, the gender ideology and where the extremists are in all of this? What's the scenario that you could see for the future under a Labor-Greens government?
Look, really bleak, to be quite honest, Neil. There's no appetite for them to change the Sex Discrimination Act. They're quite happy with allowing males in female sports and prisons and all of those other spaces. So I think that it would be really horrendous for women and children in Australia if the Labor and Greens are in power. They've not been responsive to us at all. In fact, they've doubled down. So we really need to make a big effort during this election to turn the tide.
And what we're hearing too is that it's not much better if there's a coalition elected because there's no commitment there to any sort of change either. So for anyone who thinks that, you might have just, shoes on one side politically, they're both as bad as each other, aren't they?
Almost. Maybe not quite, but almost. The Liberal Party, as I said, Peter Dutton has, when he was pressured, came out and said that he doesn't think males really belong in female sport, but he also said in the same interview that he has no appetite to change the Sex Discrimination Act. So I don't know what he thinks he's going to be able to do if he doesn't do that, because we haven't come up with any other solution so far. However, the Nationals, who do make up part of that coalition, David Shoebridge and others, have come out and clearly said that they think that there should be women's sex-based rights and child protection. So our hope is that we can pressure them to do that.
So there is a glimmer of hope on the coalition side if the coalition wins government. But as I'm saying, the polls might suggest that the coalition might not be strong enough. It might be too close an election likelihood for a hung parliament and the likely probability of a Labor-Greens power-sharing arrangement. So there might be a little glimmer of hope if the Dutton Liberal National Coalition can win power. Hey, let's talk about the sorts of people who are jumping on the bandwagon here now and saying this is not good enough. We mentioned female athletes. What about the medical practitioners? Is there any movement here as to medical practitioners, and they're the other ones that obviously will recognise the unreality of some of the things like we're talking about today?
Yes, Neil, and it's been so encouraging. We saw Dr. Gillian Spencer, who was stood down from the Brisbane Children's Hospital for questioning the use of puberty blockers in children. She got together more than 100 signatories to write an open letter to the government about these terrible practices in child gender clinics, and more than 40 of them were doctors and health professionals. I've also found that our book, Devastated, How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart, since we released that in November, I've been contacted by many, many health professionals, including GPs and doctors, who are now doing podcasts, speaking out, trying to make alliances with other doctors, because they know that if they can increase their voice and the politicians will listen to them because they have the qualifications and the experience, that we have a good chance of turning back the tide. Now, the Queensland government were forced into a position where they had to call an inquiry into gender practices because 42 children, at least in Cairns, were put on puberty blockers without parental knowledge or consent. The federal government quickly followed that with a promise to do some sort of inquiry, but it really lacks teeth. It's very drawn out. And it won't have the desired effect. They're just trying to make the issue go away for the election. But the more doctors and health practitioners that speak out, the better. And there's quite a few organisations now working behind the scenes to share that sort of information and empower these doctors to have a voice and make a difference.
Taking calls, 1800 316 316. Alex is in Melbourne. Hey, Alex, welcome along.
Oh, hello there, Neil. I was just thinking about Peter Dutton. He should look to the truth and also not to worry about what the electorate thinks, but what reality says. And he's also got the National Party going the way as well. So I don't know what's wrong with it. But anyway, God help him. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Thoughts for Alex from you, Kirralie?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to pray for Peter Dutton. But Alex, I would say to you and to everyone else listening, please ring Peter Dutton's office, send him an email and let him know that this is an important issue to you, because so many of the politicians say, oh, people don't talk to me about it, which I don't think is the truth either. However, the more of us that continue to pick up the phone, write an email, write a letter and let them know they are without excuse, then that they will know that this is a very important issue. And as you said, this isn't even about a matter of opinion or a political persuasion. This is based on fact. It is reality, and that's what they need to get back to.
Yeah, God help them.
Alex, anything further to add?
Maybe some details as to how to contact people.
How to contact people, the right people to make the right influence. Kirralie, any thoughts here for Alex?
Yeah, look, absolutely. We need to, if you've got access to a computer, you can easily find the contact details for our Prime Minister, for Peter Dutton, and for your local members. They will have their office phone number, their parliamentary email. That's all you need. Get in touch with them. Let them know where you stand on this.
Alex in Melbourne, thank you so much for your call. 1800 316 316 to be part of our conversation. Come back to the book for a moment, because the launch last November devastated how gender ideology is tearing Australian families apart. Have you been able to get the book into the hands of our political decision makers?
Yes, Neil, we gifted copies to every MP at the federal level. We've also sent many out to senators and state politicians, and if any are listening today, more than happy to get a copy to you. We've been selling many, many copies. You can get them through our website and on Amazon. And I'm also doing some touring with some of the parents on this. I'll be in Perth from, I think it's the 26th, 27th of this month of March. We'll be in Sydney next month, I hope. We'll be in New Zealand even later on in the year talking about these issues. And it's a hard book to read. It's not easy. It's the harrowing stories of 9 families who have been through this. And it's not easy, but it's really necessary that people are informed about these issues.
When you say touring, are you going to be part of any particular special events in the lead up to our coming federal election?
There's a couple of private events where I'm speaking with politicians, or it's invitation only. And if for the public events, if people want to get on our mailing list at binary.org.au, you will be informed of anything that's coming up in your area.
And Kirralie, before we finish the conversation today, back to your own personal battles and being dragged before the courts on all sorts of issues. And those courts, they're designed to be a weapon. We talk about weaponising the courts and a way to silence someone who might have some things to say around these sorts of issues where there's an unreality that looks to some people to be the reality. How are you going with those? I mean, because these can be an expensive exercise going through the courts, and you've had, I don't think you've just about lost count, I think, of the number of times now you've been dragged before the courts. This must be costing you personally. Is there a way that listeners can participate in helping you get through?
Oh, absolutely, Neil. This is such a difficult battle. It's one that I'm prepared for in my spirit, in myself. I have the fortitude and the ability to fight this because I know I'm right and that it's biblical truth and it's backed by scientific evidence. However, I'm not financially able to pay the hundreds of thousands of dollars that are required in legal fees, taking note that those who are taking me to court are being taxpayer funded and represented pro bono with government incentives, and I'm left with more than almost $200,000 worth of bills that need to be paid. And so anyone who is able to contribute, there's a donate page at binary.org.au, or you can send an email to info@binary.org.au for more information.
Sometimes we can say, wouldn't it be good if someone was standing up for truth and righteousness and a biblical foundation, biology and a biblical foundation around sex and gender and defending girls and women and defending children who are being, in so many ways, taken for granted and without parental consent being caused to take all sorts of life-changing drugs. Well, here's your opportunity to be a support for Kirralie Smith. I do like to take the opportunity to say, you can check in with Kirralie at binary.org.au. No doubt there's a way there. You can make a donation that might even offset some of the costs that it takes, counting the cost to be able to stand up for truth and righteousness, and certainly honour to you, Kirralie Smith. Binary.org.au. No doubt you can also subscribe to be an email subscriber, something like 100,000 email subscribers. So it's a substantial number of people supportive of Binary and of Kirralie Smith. And don't forget that documentary that's going to air this week on Thursday night, 8:30 Daylight Saving Time. It's called Fair Game and has a primary focus around men in women's sport. So wonderful getting your insights as always, Kirralie Smith. For listeners, just getting a hold of the book too. don't forget the devastated book, How Gender Ideology is Tearing Australian Families Apart. Kirralie Smith, thanks so much for updating us today on 2020.
Thanks for having me again, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.